His father was murdered by the Khmer Rouge, that terrible regime in Cambodia. His mother and his siblings escaped to California. So his mother meets the man and she marries him, but he turned out to be a horrible husband, terrible stepfather. He physically and mentally and emotionally beat and abused his mother and him till he was 17 years old. She finally got the courage up and got enough money up that they moved to Georgia. When they got to Georgia, they had two things in common. They were Buddhist and they were bitter. That's what they had in common. Every day they talked about this stepfather. Every day they talked about this husband. Every day they would reminisce about how mean he was and how wicked he was and how terrible he was and how they wished terrible things would happen to him. They were just eaten up with it. He said one day some friends invited his mother to visit a Cambodian church in Winder, Georgia. She started attending. So one day she came home and she told her son, "I've become a Christian." He said, "Pastor, I really didn't care much for Buddhism," but he said, "I wasn't interested in religion at all. I'd had enough of religion. I didn't want any part of it." But he couldn't help but notice this radical change in his mother. His mother no longer talked about that stepfather except in loving terms and in kind terms and in sympathetic terms. And he just couldn't help but notice how she was totally different. And he said, "Mother, what's happened to you?" She said, "I have fully, freely, and finally forgiven that man for all he has done to me." And he said, "Pastor, the one thing I couldn't get away from was the change that took place in my mother's life. I just couldn't get over it." So he said, "I thought I'm going to go visit this church." And they announced on that day they're going to have a 6-week learning class about Christianity. So he takes that 6-week learning class, and at the end of that class, he gives his life to Jesus Christ. He's looking in the mirror, and he's got tears in his eyes. I said, "Van, that's incredible." And what he said next was so powerful to me, I made sure I got it in my phone before I wouldn't forget it. This is a direct quote. He said, "What is truly incredible is when I realized what Jesus had done for me, I had to do for my stepfather, and I forgave him." And then he said, with a smile on his face and with tears in my eyes, "Now I'm a